There's a difference between a place you live and a place that slowly becomes home. Most people don't notice the moment that change happens. It doesn't arrive all at once. There's no clear sign. It shows up quietly in ways you don't expect. When I first came to Utah, I wasn't thinking about neighbors. I was thinking about boxes, addresses, which room would be which. Like most people who move from another state, I was focused on starting over, not settling in. At that point in my life, I didn't need excitement. I needed calm. Utah looked calm enough. The neighborhood itself didn't stand out. Rows of houses that looked familiar, even though I'd never been there before. Clean streets, wide sidewalks, lawns trimmed just enough to show someone cared. It didn't feel special. It felt steady, and honestly, that was enough. On the first day, I spent most of my time moving things inside. Box after box, room after room. The kind of work that keeps your body busy, so your mind doesn't wander too far. I remember telling myself, I'll meet the neighbors later. There was no rush. In other places I'd lived, neighbors usually meant one of two things, either polite distance or curiosity that felt like pressure, so I didn't expect much. Then, sometime that afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Not loud, not urgent, just a simple knock. When I opened the door, there was a woman standing there. She looked like she belonged to the street. Not dressed up, not in a hurry. She smiled. Not the kind of smile that asks questions, but the kind that simply acknowledges you. She introduced herself, said she lived a few houses down, and noticed the moving truck. She didn't ask where we were from. She didn't ask how long we planned to stay. She just said, "Welcome." Then she handed me a small container, homemade. She said, "Just in case tonight feels like a long day." That was it. No conversation. No explanation. She left before I could even think of a response. I stood there holding that container longer than I needed to. It wasn't about the food. It was the fact that someone noticed us arrive. The fact that someone acted on that noticing. Later that evening, as I went back outside to grab another box, a man walking his dog waved. He didn't stop. He didn't interrupt. Just a simple wave, like he was saying, "I see you. You're part of this now." Over the next few days, small things kept happening. Someone casually mentioned when trash day was, before I had to ask. Another neighbor pointed out which side of the street was easier to park on during busy hours. No one made a big deal of it. No one hovered. They just helped, then went on with their day. At first I told myself this was coincidence, but then it kept happening. Someone brought our trash cans back up to the house on a day I completely forgot. No note, no announcement, just done. Another time, after not seeing us for a few days, a neighbor asked, "Everything okay?" Not worried, not intrusive, just aware. If you've lived in other states, you know how unusual that balance can feel. In some places, neighbors avoid eye contact. In others, they ask questions you didn't invite. Here, people seemed to know exactly where the line was. Friendly, but respectful. Present, but not demanding. That's when I realized something important. This wasn't just politeness, this was culture. Utah neighbors don't just live near you, they live with you, quietly. They pay attention without making it obvious. They help without keeping score. They don't ask you to explain yourself before offering kindness, and that took me a while to get used to. Coming from other places, you almost wait for the moment when the kindness feels conditional. But here, that moment never came. The friendliness didn't escalate. It didn't turn into expectation. It just stayed steady. Then one evening, something happened that really stayed with me. We were outside unloading a few last boxes when a couple from across the street walked over. They didn't come empty-handed. They brought chairs. They said, "We figured you might want to sit for a minute." That was it. No long conversation. No questions about our past. We sat there together, watching the sun go down. At one point, the woman looked around the street and said something quietly. She said, "You know, when we moved here from another state, this is when it finally felt like home." She didn't say it dramatically. She said it like a realization she'd had many times before. That sentence hit harder than I expected, because it wasn't about the house or the street. It was about the people. I've heard that same sentence many times since, from people who moved here from California, from Texas, from the East Coast. They all say something similar. It just feels different here. I didn't know neighbors could be like this. I didn't realize how much I needed this. They don't talk about mountains. They don't talk about weather. They talk about how it feels to be noticed without being judged. After a while, you stop noticing the small acts of kindness one by one. Not because they stop happening, but because they start feeling normal. That's how you know something has changed. In the beginning, every interaction stands out. Every wave, every short conversation. You remember them because they feel unexpected, but over time, those moments blend into the rhythm of everyday life. And that's when a neighborhood truly starts to feel like home. Weeks turn into months. You learn which houses light up early in the morning, which garages open at the same time every weekday, which streets go quiet first at night. You don't track these things consciously. You just absorb them. The neighborhood begins to feel familiar in a way that goes beyond memory. It feels understood. You start recognizing people by patterns rather than names. The man who walks his dog every evening at the same time. The couple who always sit outside when the weather is good. The neighbor who leaves early and comes back late. You don't need to know their stories to feel connected to them. There's comfort in that. At some point, you stop feeling like a guest, not because anyone officially welcomed you, but because the space around you stopped feeling foreign. One afternoon, you realize you're standing outside talking longer than you meant to. Not about anything important, just small things, weather, traffic, how fast the seasons seem to change here. The conversation doesn't need a purpose. That's new. In other places, you often felt the need to keep things moving, to wrap things up, to get back inside. Here, standing around doesn't feel like wasted time. It feels like part of the day. Over time, you begin to notice something else. People show up when it matters, not in dramatic ways, not with big gestures, but consistently. When someone's car won't start, someone else notices. When a package sits outside too long, someone moves it. When something feels off, someone quietly checks in. They don't announce themselves. They don't expect recognition. They just act. And slowly, that changes how you move through your own life. You start paying more attention, not out of obligation, but out of awareness. You find yourself bringing someone's trash cans back in without thinking about it. You hold a door longer than necessary. You wave first. You don't do these things to be polite. You do them because that's how the neighborhood works. At some point, you realize you're no longer just receiving this culture, you're part of it. That realization lands differently the older you are. When you're younger, community often feels optional, something nice to have, but not essential. As you get older, that you understand how rare it really is. You've lived long enough to know how easily people drift apart, how easy it is to live next to someone for years and never really feel connected. Here, connection doesn't require effort. It requires presence. And that's something many people didn't realize they were missing until they moved here. I've talked to neighbors who came from bigger cities. They tell similar stories, how everyone was busy, how people stayed polite but distant, how they didn't realize how tense they were until they weren't anymore. One neighbor told me, "I didn't know how much noise I was carrying until it got quiet." They weren't talking about sound, they were talking about pressure. Utah has a way of lowering that pressure without calling attention to it. The neighborhood doesn't ask you to be different, it just gives you room to be yourself. And over time, that room turns into trust. Trust that your space is respected. Trust that help is nearby if you need it. Trust that you don't have to explain yourself all the time. That trust changes how you see where you live. The house becomes more than a structure. The street becomes more than a route. It becomes a place where life happens, without constant defense. That matters more than people realize, especially for those who arrive here later in life. People who have already lived through stress, through loss, through places that felt temporary. They don't come looking for excitement. They come looking for relief. And often they find it in the smallest moments. A neighbor remembering your name, someone asking how you're settling in, a quiet, "Let me know if you need anything," that actually means something. As time passes, the neighborhood begins to hold your memories. Not just the big ones, the everyday ones. The mornings you leave early, the evenings you come home tired, the days nothing special happens. Those days matter more than you think, because those are the days that make up a life. And when those days are lived in a place where people notice each other, that they feel lighter, there comes a moment, usually without warning, when you realize you're no longer comparing this place to where you came from. You're no longer thinking, "Well, back there it was different." You stop measuring, you start accepting. That's when you know this place has become yours, not because it's perfect, not because everything is easy, but because you feel supported in ways you didn't expect. That support isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up again and again in ordinary ways. That's what makes it powerful. When people talk about why they love Utah, they often mention landscapes, the mountains, the open sky. Those things matter. But for many people, what stays with them isn't the view. It's the feeling of being part of something, without being consumed by it, of being known just enough, of being left alone when needed and noticed when it matters. That balance is hard to find. And once you experience it, you understand why people talk about Utah the way they do. Even those who eventually move away carry that feeling with them. They compare other places to this one. They notice when neighbors don't look up, when help feels transactional, when kindness comes with conditions. That's when they realize how special this was. If you've lived here long enough, you know what I'm talking about. If you're new here, you'll feel it soon enough. And if you once lived here and moved away, this story might sound familiar, because a neighborhood that feels like home doesn't stop being home just because you leave. It becomes part of how you understand belonging. It shapes what you expect from the world. And maybe that's why stories like this matter, because they remind us that home isn't always about where you were born or where you ended up. Sometimes home is the place that showed you how community can feel: quiet, steady, human. If this story brought someone to mind, a neighbor, a street, a moment, you're not alone. A lot of us carry these memories quietly, and sometimes it helps to say them out loud, even if it's just a few words, even if it's just to say, "Yeah, that's how it felt for me too."